I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. So I don't just make pottery, I make resources for other potters wanting to be more eco-friendly in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you. And I'm so glad you're here with me. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about how to stop cracking in your pots. Oh, cracking in your pots, it's so annoying. It's like, you spent ages making this like beautiful pot and then uh, cracking happens, like the handle cracks off, or it just generally like cracks down the side, or the base can crack in pots you've made on the wheel, or so many other so many other types of cracking can occur in pottery, and it's so frustrating. And the most frustrating thing I think as well is I've had this situation where I haven't really seen the crack initially, so like when it goes into the bisque firing, but then when it comes out, or when it comes out of a glaze firing, the crack is like opened up massively because the pot is under so much stress, in those high temperatures, and it's just like opened up the crack loads, and it's just basically, you can then see, oh no, my pot is ruined, there's nothing I can do about it. So it's annoying when you only see like at a later date, when you've already kind of gone to the trouble of firing something. But there are things you can do to stop cracking in your pots. So that's what this episode is all about. Like, let's talk about like how to stop cracking, because clay can, it can get stressed out, and when it gets stressed out, it can crack. So there are things we can do to kind of like stop it doing that. So let's just talk about like generally cracking. So clay really likes to be dried slowly and evenly. Okay, so if like you've got a pot and you've got one part of it which is quite thick and you've got one part of it which is quite thin, that kind of pot is very much more prone to cracking, because the thicker part will be drying at a slower rate than that thinner part. Say like you've got a very thin rim or something, if that thin rim is drying, and it's dried, it's going to be putting sort of different stress on the clay pot if the base, or if that's very thick. That's going to be drying at a slower rate, and the whole pot is going to be under stress. So in those kind of situations, you can get like cracking occur. So what you want to do is you want to dry your pot slowly and evenly. And how on earth do you do that? Okay, well basically you need to stop the rim from drying out too quickly. So you want to be doing something like maybe putting it in a damp box, which is basically just like, say like a plastic storage box with a lid. You can make your own damp box, put the whole thing in there, and that stops the water from evaporating very fast from the pot. So the whole pot will just dry loads more slowly and much more evenly. Put it in a plastic box with a lid, or in say like an educational pottery setting, they might use damp cupboards. They might have just like the same principle, but like a big cupboard that everyone puts their work in. You can also wrap it in plastic. That can help, like a plastic bag, and keep sort of taking the plastic bag off, letting it dry for a little bit, putting the plastic bag on, because you're just trying to dry that pot really slowly and evenly. But I would really recommend a damp box actually, because you can reuse it loads of times, and it doesn't like squash your pot. Whereas if you're using a plastic bag, sometimes you can accidentally like squash your pot. So it's really good to just pop it in the box. You can put it on a tile or put it on a wooden board or something. Pop it in the damp box, put the lid on, and then you can control that drying speed of that pot. You can take the lid off sometimes, put the lid back on again. That's a really good way to like dry your pot really slowly. Okay, so on a similar note, clay also doesn't like to be have extremes of temperature. So I've experienced this actually when I used to work in a sort of outbuilding, and it used to get very, very cold in there, like very cold. So I would actually have quite a lot of cracking in my pots when the extremes of temperature were sort of, either end. So if it was, say, like very hot, so sometimes if you put a pot like in the sun, you think, oh, that'd be really nice. It'll dry really quickly and it'll be great. And actually, it's drying too quickly, and it's too hot for that pot, and it might start cracking then. Or again, if it's too cold, if you're doing pottery in a very cold space, that can cause cracking too, because it's just too cold, for that pot. It's like extremes of temperature. So you kind of just you want to try and, obviously it's better for you to do pottery in a place which is actually warm as well. Or not even warm, just room, just tepid. That's another key piece of advice. So don't let your pot get like really, really hot in the sun or really, really cold. Then that will kind of stop a lot of the cracking as well. Okay, so another time when pots often crack is when you're trying to join bits of pottery together, at the leather hard stage, or you've got like some wet clay you're trying to join to something else. The reason for cracking usually in these situations is that you're trying to join one piece of clay which is one level of dryness to another piece of clay that is a different level of dryness. Okay, so it could be, for example, a mug. Say like if you're trying to attach a handle, it could be that the mug is a lot drier because you say like you've turned the base of it, it's like leather hard, but you're trying to attach a handle which is like much wetter, or you've left your handle to dry too much and your handle's like very dry and you're trying to attach it to like a much wetter pot. In those situations, you can quite often have cracking occur because like you need to be attaching things together that are the same level of dryness. So if they dry at different rates, they will sort of, the clay is shrinking, it's going to contract at different rates, and then they're just going to crack apart basically. So again, a top tip for kind of avoiding this is just try and make sure that the two bits you're joining are the similar kind of dampness basically. You can do things like scoring it really well. When you attach it, and attaching with a little bit of obviously a little bit of like slip and really smoothing it. But putting it into a damp box. So after you've made something, and say if you're thinking, I'm not sure if the two bits, are the same level of dryness, I'm a bit worried about one drying out before the other one might be a bit thinner, it might dry a bit quicker than the other one. Putting it in a damp box is a great idea because then it will just slow the drying process down and everything will dry evenly, and any bits that are like you may be drying too fast, they will stop and they might even absorb water from the atmosphere of the box, and the whole thing will just dry out at the same rate. So yeah, that's a real top tip. If so like every time I've made a mug, for example, I always put it in a damp box and I just dry it really, really slowly because handles are notoriously bad at cracking off. They are they are really annoying. So anything you can do, it's very easy just to pop it in a box. Anything you can do to kind of slow down that drying process, stop the handle from drying out too fast is a great thing. Basically, it will really help you with handles not cracking off. Okay, so there are some other top tips actually, and these relate to like if you're doing slip casting. Slip casting is terribly prone to cracking. It's really bad, and I think I'm not sure exactly why that's the case. I think it's probably something to do with when you're making a pot on the wheel, you're really forcing those kind of clay molecules together, and they're really tight, less prone to cracking. Whereas when you're slip casting, it's like you're kind of just pouring it in, and I don't know, there's something about slip casting which makes cracking is it can be a really terrible problem in slip casting. Like I've experienced this terribly. And when I was researching it actually, because I was like, I don't know how to stop the cracking in my slip cast ware, it was like really frustrating. I just could not work it out. I was doing loads of research about like what I could do basically to stop cracking, and these are the things I found out. So this might be might be helpful to you, like if that's happening for you. So the first top tip I read in a book was that actually it could be that your your casting slip recipe actually needs more ball clay in. So ball clay is kind of a real strengthener for for slip, for casting slip. So you can increase the percentage of ball clay, and that actually might stop cracking in the casting slip. So another way of stopping cracking, and this is like absolutely amazing, and this is what I ended up doing, and this is what I practice now when I do slip casting, is that you can actually add paper to your casting slip. And this is like an incredible magic ingredient, paper. It was so amazing, right? So it increases the strength of the clay, like it's incredible. It just, so what I do is I actually add kitchen roll, which I've kind of mashed up into a paper pulp and made it back into the paper pulp. And then and it's made of bamboo, so it's like bamboo kitchen paper, and I add that back into my casting slip. And yeah, if you're interested in that, actually, there is a recipe for the paper casting slip in Eco-Friendly Pottery, the book Eco-Friendly Pottery, 30 Simple Ways to Make Your Pottery Practice More Ethical and Sustainable. So yeah, that book basically has the recipe for the paper clay casting slip, which I use now for all my work, for all my casting slip work, and it's so good. So basically, yeah, put the bamboo kitchen paper. You don't have to use kitchen paper. You can use basically any paper or any kind of cellulose fibre. So it could be like flax. I've seen commercial clay actually with flax fibres in, for throwing. You can use, when I read about adding paper to casting slip, the person actually used toilet paper, and they kind of mix that into a pulp. That goes into a pulp really easily, and they just put a teaspoon of that in their casting slip, and that stopped the cracking. So that's where I first heard about it, and I thought, oh, I wonder if it would work with bamboo kitchen rolls. So and it does. It's amazing. So yeah, so adding paper pulp to your casting slip will dramatically decrease the cracking in your work. It's amazing. And so, yeah, just to say as well, I know on paper clay in general, adding paper pulp to work, it is just amazing the kind of things you can do. So there's this really fantastic book called, I think it's called Paper Clay Art and Practice or something, by Rosette Gold, I think is the author. And it's so good. It's like it just goes through all the different ratios of adding paper to clay, and loads of different artists in there about like the work they've managed to make by adding paper to their clay, because it makes it so much stronger. They can just do all this like amazing stuff, making, oh, it's so good, making sculptures from string that they've dipped in slip because it's so strong. Then the string burns away and they're left with this like incredible kind of nest of it's just amazing, of clay. It's so good. So it's very inspiring. That I found that book very inspiring because it just shows by adding even a small amount of paper to clay just how much stronger it makes it. Really exciting. So okay, so I think that's all the bits I have on my notes in terms of like how to stop cracking that I wanted to tell you about. Cracking's like super annoying. I would say if you want one top tip to stop cracking, it would be don't let your pots dry too fast. Just really slow down that drying process, and generally, it will fix like most of the problems, especially in hand built work, hand thrown work. It will really stop those cracks. Just slowing it down, the drying. Don't let it a bit dry faster than the other, and it generally will be fixable. So damp boxes are amazing. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and until the next episode, happy potting, and don't let your work dry out too fast. No, it's a joke. Cool, I'll see you next time, and happy potting. So if you enjoyed that and you're interested to learn more about eco-conscious pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.